Ready to get moving? We have some inspiration for you. Welcome to another episode of What's Next? Living Longer, Better, Smarter. This edition is made possible by Vivid-Pix.
So I've been in the photo business for 37 years, and I've seen a lot of things come, go. But one thing has not changed, and that this wonderful thing we call a photograph captures a moment in time so that we're able to reminisce and relive those memories tomorrow. And it's important for us to do that so we can share them with loved ones and we can share them with future generations. So please don't let your memories fade. They're important.
In this episode, Get Moving, Healthier Aging for Everyone. I'm Fred Fishkin, along with Mary Furlong. Hi, Mary.
Hi, Fred. This really has been one of those long, hot summers for millions and millions of people all over the country. But we can always find ways to get some exercise and become healthier.
Well, we have a couple of guests to provide some motivation. We'll be hearing from a researcher at the University of Maryland who's been looking at the effects of exercise on our brains. But first, we're going to get motivated and inspired by Ellen Jaffe-Jones. She is one of a group of Get Set Up athletes who took part in this summer's Senior Games in Pittsburgh. Hi, Ellen.
Hey, Fred.
It's so wonderful to meet you, Ellen, and we're so excited that you and other Get Set Up athletes took 5 gold medals in all, and overcoming quite a few health-related obstacles along the way. And you have a wonderful story to tell. Look at those awards behind you, being a former journalist with 2 Emmy Awards. So tell us more.
So you're right. I was a TV investigative and consumer reporter for 18 years in Miami, St. Louis, my first job in Des Moines, never want to look at snow again. And my mom, aunt, and both sisters had breast cancer. We were part of the BRCA1 and BRCA2 gene studies. I'm the only adult female without it. And so kind of my hidden agenda being a reporter was trying to interview doctors and dietitians starting in the 1970s, trying to figure out the truth about food. And I did have a OBGYN who said to me kind of early on, you know, there's some research starting to come in that a low-fat, vegan or vegetarian, they were calling it back then, diet, may be helpful trying to turn off those genes if you have the gene. And I always lived my life as if I did. And it wasn't until those gene studies became published that I was actually able under Medicare to go in and get the gene testing. I kind of figured, since I looked like my dad a lot, that I didn't have the gene. And sure enough, that is correct. So my 3 daughters are very grateful about that because it is definitely passed on in lineage. But point being is my parents and my extended family, they all had diabetes and heart disease. And I was the youngest in my family. My sisters were 9 and 11 years older than me. And I just had a lifetime to figure out what I didn't want to happen to me to the extent we can control it. And indeed, now there is a whole study called epigenetics about how our genes are turned on and turned off. Turns out I have some really horrible cholesterol genes. But again, what doctors have said is my heart has done its own bypass. I have a cardiac calcium score of 1400, which basically means I should have been dead 5 years ago. So don't believe everything you hear.
Well, obviously you are extremely fit. You ran all 7 track events at the Senior Games, took home gold with the relay team. Congratulations on that, Ellen. But tell us more about your athletic background. And I know you're a certified personal trainer.
Right. And also a certified running coach as well, because I was helping to be I was the assistant coach at our local high school a number of years ago. When the head coach, we were running together and she said, you know, you're clocking 8-minute miles. And it's like, when I went to high school and college, there was no Title IX. We had home economics and maybe field hockey after school. That was it. And so I discovered my inner track genes. I've done 2 full marathons, 13 half marathons. And I'm told that somebody with my sprint times shouldn't even have been able to finish a marathon. But I did that just to kind of prove a point. Behind me is 282 5K or longer age group awards since 2006, as I like to say, just on plants. Because I adopted a vegan diet, a healthful vegan diet, I would wear, and I wrote 6 vegan books. The first one, Eat Vegan on $4 a Day. I had a t-shirt with the book cover on it. And somebody came up to me at a race once and said, oh, you can't run on a vegan diet. You certainly can't compete on it because, you're so weak. To which I always say, does it look like I have a protein deficiency? Because that's what everybody worries about on a vegan diet. And then I say, have you been to the protein deficiency wing of your hospital? Do you know anybody who's even been diagnosed with it, who's died of it? Those kinds of things, not on the radar. We get plenty of protein in our culture.
So tell us more about your work with the Get Set Up platform, which is so wonderful and has grown so fast. How has that helped accelerate your brand and your growth?
Well, Get Set Up is just this amazing platform of free or affiliated classes, depending on what organization you're with, where you can go in and take classes about any topic. And they came to me before last year's National Senior Games and said, we'd like to sponsor you. You'll be our first sponsored athlete. And I was the only one. And then this year they sponsored, I don't even know how many, but an entire volleyball team. And so all of us got to wear, these little uniforms, and they paid our expenses to the Senior Games. For me, I had to fly up there from Florida and stay for a week because, they don't do all 7 track events on one day. It's spread out over time. So they've been so supportive. I'm an instructor or a guide for them, and I teach fitness classes online for people who don't want to go out of the house to go to a gym, or for whatever reason can't get out. I teach balance classes because surprisingly, even as an athlete, balance is one of the first things to go, and you got to work on that. So I do just an entire hour teaching for them on balance. Who would have known? So it's a lot of fun for us. I began running at the age of 28, about 42 years ago. Same time I started changing my diet. And that's when I really started to see changes. But, it's never too late to start running or, any kind of aerobic workout. It's just also beneficial. Walking 10 minutes after every meal, practically, according to one study, negates your chances of getting diabetes. I mean, how cool is that? Not that you would be, you have to do other things as well, but just things like that can really make such an impact. And Get Set Up has been so helpful in helping many of us spread the message about what we're doing, that, once you are into the golden years, whatever that is, you can decide what you want to be when you grow up. I mean, I never would have thought, well, I did kind of fantasize I might be doing something like this when I was younger, but, not seriously. And how cool is it that we can all it's never too late to live your dreams.
I know a little bit about Sarasota, where you live, and it's sort of the microcosm of the baby boomer market is there. And there's a lot of people who are reinventing themselves and looking at encore careers. And so you were a real estate agent, and then did you pivot into fitness? So has that how it's come together?
So actually, it was kind of the reverse. I wrote 6 health and fitness vegan cookbooks, Kitchen Divided, Paleo Vegan, Vegan Fitness for Mortals. The 5th book was Vegan Sex, which I co-wrote with a vegan cardiologist, because what's good for the heart is good for other parts. And we could do a whole hour on that topic. And then I like to joke, if vegan sex doesn't work out, vegan for one, single serving recipes. So I was doing all that. I was on the national lecture circuit for 11 years, had this and still have this big YouTube channel. And then all of a sudden COVID. And within a week, overnight, my speaking career ended. So my 15 years younger boyfriend, who is also, he's been in Sarasota real estate for 40 years, and he is now a broker. He said, why don't you just get licensed and come work with me? I grew up in the construction industry. My dad owned a lighting fixture business in St. Louis. So I passed the test on my first try and was actually #1 in sales at the beginning of the year until he took me over. He has done very well and continues to do that. But I've been able to learn from him, kind of fast track that. Unfortunately, the lecture circuit, the Veg Fest and all the different events I was speaking at, they really haven't opened back up again. Mm-hmm. I did fast track learning Zoom. So I do a lot on Zoom, but you generally don't get paid for that. So I need to make some money to support my running addiction, because these races, and you talk about what's here in Sarasota. Oh my gosh, there's just so much. that you can do, whether it's, I mean, there's usually 2 or 3 5K races a weekend in this general area. So I ran so many the last 2 years that I actually won the racing series, not only for my age group, but for the entire club. And they give you points, you know, if you come in first, second, third, that kind of thing. So, but if you don't want to do that, did I mention pickleball? I mean, they're tearing down tennis courts to build pickleball courts. There's just so much going on here. Why? Because we can exercise outside pretty much any day of the year. And I'm sorry, I don't mean to offend any Midwesterners, but I grew up, worked in St. Louis. You don't get much warning for tornadoes and earthquakes, both of which I experienced twice while I lived there. Hurricanes, you get a few days. You can get the heck out of Dodge if you need to do that.
So with all the heat that we've experienced all around the country this summer, tell me what your tips are for trying to stay fit during these heat waves that have been so brutal.
Well, you know, fortunately, there are health clubs and they are air conditioned, and there are so many different ones around here. Actually, if you don't know this, Medicare, they have affiliations with different programs like Silver Sneakers and others out there where they will give you a number. You walk into a health club and you get, I have a membership at LA Fitness, so I can go get my jacuzzi. And I also can take Pilates classes at another club 1 day a week. So I get, you know, my strength training. And so there's just all these different programs out there that I would encourage you to explore so you can stay inside. I will tell you that yesterday morning, I ran 4 miles on Siesta Key Beach, the #1 beach in America. The breeze at the beach is fabulous, especially at sunrise. And people think, well, on the West Coast of Florida, you know, you're not seeing the sunset like you would later in the day, but the clouds, like the last few days, because there are these huge thunderheads, the color of the sunrise is hitting them, and there are these big rainbows coming out of them. I mean, it's this just spiritual experience to be able to run on the beach, kind of commune with the birds, and then after you've done that, you jump in the water, float on your back, and it is heaven on earth.
What do you get asked about the most?
Where do I
Ellen?
get that?
And I'm going to assume it's that vegan sex book, but it might be something else.
Well, you know, people still do ask, you know, where do you get your protein? And I'll usually answer that by saying, I get my protein where your protein gets its protein. We go right to the source. So, you know, the biggest animals on the planet are vegan. You know, think a giraffe, elephants, rhinoceri. And they don't have issues getting protein. I mean, there's even a gram of protein in a banana. Not that I would suggest you make your diet out of just bananas, but you know, we obsess about these micronutrients. And at this point in my life, I'm just not too worried about it. You know, the cool thing, vegans generally don't get arthritis. And I think that's one of the main reasons I've been able to continue to be active. You know, I tell people I've been a runner for 42 years and they go, oh, your knees. And I go, oh, my knees are fine. And the key really is to find softer surfaces to run on, because concrete is that 100-year-old invention, not really designed for the human skeleton. So I try and get on crushed shell surfaces, trails, not too many roots, because, you know, you don't want to be tripping over those. But really, you know, I asked that question when I first moved here. How do you guys run in Florida in the summertime? And I heard this 5K out my window. I lived across from a park and went over there and just asked a woman that question. And she said, just get up at sunrise. And that's what a lot of people do. And you find a lot of breakfast and lunch places are very popular here because so many people do start their day early and then go to sleep early.
Well, this is so inspiring. I just joined a challenge of 2 miles a day for the month of August, but I'm going to go out there. In California, we can walk even after lunch. So such a wonderful, inspiring talk, Ellen. Congratulations. I'm so glad you're doing what you're doing, both in Florida and at the games, and also online on the Get Set Up platform. So congratulations.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate your time.
Old older brains and exercise. That was the focus of a study at the University of Maryland. It has been making headlines, and joining us is J. Carson Smith, a professor of kinesiology, I'm going to say that right, at the university, director for the Exercise for Brain Health Laboratory, and leader on this study. Thank you for spending time with us, Dr. Smith.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you for your interest in our work.
Yes, it's very exciting work you're doing. As I said earlier, I'm 74, and I think 5 of my friends have fallen over the past few months. So we want to learn more about your study and what you found and what is new.
Yeah, so certainly falling is related to cognitive decline. Falling wasn't a primary outcome in our study. We are primarily interested in the networks of the brain that govern cognitive function. And, we know that that cognitive decline involves more than just a singular brain area or, one part of the brain that changes, but it involves the networks of the brain. So in this study, what we did that was new was, we looked at the broader, large-scale networks of the brain and how these brain networks interact with one another, and also within the brain network, how things were modified through exercise. I would also say that, as people get older and as they experience cognitive decline, one of the risk factors for a diagnosis of Alzheimer's disease is, a deficit in what we call episodic memory, which is, memory for episodes, as it suggests, things that happen, right, that you can recall. And testing that in the laboratory, takes a special, type of task. And we used a story recall task. So having people listen to a verbally, read short, very brief story, and then recalling as many details as possible after that story, not only immediately afterwards, but it's really the delayed performance of that type of task that people struggle with when they're experiencing, memory loss. So after a 30-minute delay where there's other distractions in the mix, people have deficits in recalling what they've heard previously. So these episodic memory deficits involve, these brain networks. And, Alzheimer's disease is a disease where a person loses their personal identity. They become disoriented easily, and also they don't know who their family members are when things become very severe. And that's really challenging for caregivers as well. So we were interested in studying individuals who have mild cognitive impairment, because many times, unfortunately, people view this condition of mild cognitive impairment as this prodromal phase or precursor phase to Alzheimer's disease as the point of no return, that people are going to just continue on this path towards dementia. And so we wanted to study these individuals in the context of exercise, because we know exercise improves cognitive function, but there are some questions of whether or not exercise can actually modify the brain networks of people who have already experienced this type of cognitive loss.
So there was some good news in what you found, right?
Oh, indeed. Yeah, there's not much bad news with exercise, even when you talk about it. Obviously, we won't get into the details, but too much of anything is not good, right? And that can be said for exercise as well. But certainly, in our study, we found that we had individuals who were diagnosed with mild cognitive impairment, and also healthy older adults that were matched in age and education. And then we had them complete a 12-week exercise program. Before and after that exercise program, we used magnetic resonance imaging to look at these brain networks. And we performed analyses where we were able to quantify these brain networks that are involved in cognition that may be related to performance of this cognitive learning task, this episodic memory task. And so we did see that there were changes within the brain networks, but also the communications between these brain networks. And interestingly, we found that the the changes within what's called the salience network and another network called the frontoparietal network were related to improvements in story recall performance or story performance in this episodic memory task.
And you were working with volunteers who were in their 70s and 80s, and there were actual physical changes, if that's the way to put it, in the brain?
Yeah, well, yeah, physical changes. We can't look at these in a molecular sense, but we can detect changes, yes, quantifiable changes in the communication patterns between the brain networks based on a blood flow signal in the brain. So these signals, we can quantify then the communication within and between these brain networks.
So what kind of exercise were they doing, and how much exercise did it take to make a difference in their storytelling recall?
Yeah, so we used a simple walking exercise intervention. So this is we utilize this because we wanted to make sure that this was something that was accessible to all types of people at a low cost and not difficult to do. And so we had people walk on a treadmill. We supervised that exercise because that helps improve adherence. As you might know, that not many people like to get on a treadmill necessarily, but having somebody there with you to encourage you definitely helps. So we had great adherence, and we had people walk at a moderate intensity over the 12 weeks. And that 12-week exercise program actually improved their fitness. That we quantified that change in their fitness as well. And so it was not a very strenuous or arduous, type of exercise. Just walking on a treadmill.
How long did they walk?
So we had them do a warm up for about 10 minutes, and then they walked for 30 minutes on the treadmill. We progressed each person over time and based the intensity and the grade of the treadmill, the speed and grade of the treadmill based on their own abilities. And, we challenged them so that they would walk a little faster, walk at a better, higher incline, but never running or anything like that. Yeah.
Now, I read that starting to exercise when we're younger is better. I guess that's common sense, but is it ever too late?
No, never too late. Yeah, obviously, exercise has strong effects on all types of health parameters, and certainly we think that exercise is good for you throughout your life. But it's not too late to start exercising. Even older adults, and these individuals were sedentary at the time they were enrolled in the study, and we saw significant improvements in their cognitive function and their brain networks as well.
So what is next in the research you're doing?
So we are interested in not only individuals who have been diagnosed with a mild memory loss and whether exercise can show neuroplasticity effects, but we're also interested in looking earlier in the disease process. So we're currently studying older adults who are cognitively healthy but have an increased genetic risk for Alzheimer's disease, because we're interested in whether or not exercise can modify the trajectory of these individuals if they're exercising, who may have a genetic or family history that would predispose them to have Alzheimer's disease. So we have a clinical trial that we're running right now that isn't not quite finished yet, so we don't have any results to report, but we are looking at whether or not increased genetic risk, that exercise may protect people from that increased genetic risk that they have. A second, if I can also just say that a second avenue that we're pursuing is looking at how a single session of exercise impacts the brain networks. So if you think about, exercise as a medicine that you give to somebody, it's important to document and show that, a single dose of exercise has some physiologic impact in the brain. And so in my lab, we're very interested in understanding how it is that exercise may, be impacting these networks after a single session.
This is really exciting. I mean, there's been some good news lately on the pharmaceutical front, I think, when it comes to Alzheimer's, but this enables people to take things into their own hands, start as early as you can, and hopefully make a difference. And you're certainly not, I don't think, going to do any harm here, right?
No, I don't think you could argue that harm could come from any of these types of exercise interventions. I mean, we all have muscle soreness that we experience with exercise, of course, but that's a good kind of soreness, right? Yeah. So the interesting thing about the pharmaceutical treatments, right, is that not all of them have been shown to be effective. In fact, many of them are not effective actually in reducing the decline in memory that people experience, or actually or even reversing it at all. There have been a lot of headlines recently about some drugs that remove amyloid from the brain, but those are controversial findings. And it's a single target that those drugs try to hit, right? It's exercise is the beauty of exercise is that it's pleiotropic, meaning that it impacts all of these systems simultaneously, all the physiological systems that in a very complex way interact with one another. Exercise can modify these all at the same time, which a pharmaceutical company would never be able to claim.
And of course, down the street from you, the NIA is funding a lot of research, and we are seeing a lot of technology entrepreneurs and investors look at new solutions that inspire people to exercise more and track their exercise. So, Dr. Smith, thank you so much for spending time with us and for the work you're doing.
You're welcome. Thank you very much for having me. It's been a pleasure to speak to both of you.
Well, Mary, between the research from Dr. Smith and his team at the University of Maryland and our Senior Games gold medal winner, Ellen Jaffe-Jones, we have a lot of motivation to get moving.
Yes, both very inspiring speakers, and I hope everyone is kind of motivated to start today, right?
Absolutely. No point putting it off. You've been doing a lot of moving of a different sort, just back from a conference in Chicago.
Yes, I love going to the Ziegler Linkage Investor Conference and hearing the case studies of the entrepreneurs and the priorities of the investors and the senior housing providers. And it's clear that AI is going to play a role in the future. It's clear that staffing issues are still something that senior housing providers have to deal with. In terms of finding the right staff, but also I like the momentum of engagement programming inside senior communities, and I'm excited that we're on the Spiro network, and that's being used by lots of people. So it's just always a little easier to go to a conference than to produce a conference, and so I was privileged to be a guest there. And then we also met with some of our clients and my online bridge group, who we always have a lot of fun with. So we play online, but every now and then we get to meet in person. So I realize I'm a bit of a city mouse. I like going on vacation in the city. And I must admit, with a granddaughter, I did get into the American Girl store, and that was really fun too. So thank you so much for asking, Fred.
Just terrific. Well, we want to thank our guests once again, Ellen Jaffe-Jones. Look for her online and on Get Set Up. And also, of course, J. Carson Smith at the Exercise for Brain Health Lab at the University of Maryland. Thanks to our sponsor, Vivid-Pix at vivid-pix.com. Don't let your memories fade. We appreciate all of you for spending time with us. You can find the full library of episodes at maryfurlong.com/podcast.